Hey, what's going on, guys? Joseph Mills from AutoMeter Garage here today with a really special episode. We are hanging out at the home base of ARS TV. Now, if you have been to a drag race, to a car show, any cool gearhead event throughout the Midwest, anytime over the past 15 years, you have met Dave and Amy Dayton from ARS TV. And today, they've welcomed us into their home base, into this garage mahal, if you will, to do a gauge install on this beautiful 1967 Chevelle. Gorgeous car here, pretty stock looking, but you look under the hood, you got a 502 big block in there, fuel injection, and my favorite part, a 5-speed manual transmission. So we're going to install a new set of the AutoMeter Chrono gauges. We've got a panel from Classic Dash, going to make it real easy to drop everything right into the location without having to cut up this Classic. So stick around. We're going to start tearing into this beast right now. So for the Chevelle, we've chosen to go with the AutoMeter Chrono series gauges. Now, I would self-describe as a watch guy, and the Chrono series gauges absolutely nail the sporting timepiece motif. Now, the dials have tons of 3D details, lots of relief, little peaks and valleys, but they also feature AutoMeter's high definition through the dial LED lighting. So totally backlit, super easy to read under all circumstances. More than just a pretty face though, all digital stepper motor technology, so super accurate, incredibly responsive, and crazy durable. One of the cool features on here is the gauges actually have 360 degrees of movement, not something that we've done previously on any instruments. We've said this 1.5 million times, but it bears repeating. When you're installing sensors on an engine, do not use Teflon tape. Now, it's not as much of an issue with our digital stepper motor gauges as the ground is actually referenced through the gauge itself. That's why there's multiple wires going to the sender. But still practicing what we preach, we're going to use just a little bit of liquid Teflon thread sealant here, and just a dab will do you. You really don't need much. And that'll just assure us that we don't have any leaks. Now, here on our 502, we've got a nice little 1/2-inch port on the water neck, and we're going to use a 13/16 wrench to tighten that down. Now, with a tapered pipe thread, with NPT, this is not going to go all the way down. You want it to have a few threads up at the top. We just want to get it snug. We're not trying to murder the thing. With the adapter in, we can go ahead and install our temperature sending unit. That's going to be a 1/2-inch wrench on there. And the official spec on these is 2 turns after finger tight. Same deal, it's a pipe thread, so it's not going to go all the way down. Now, we want to make sure we've got a little bit of this dielectric grease. I like to squirt that into there. Not that this vehicle is going to see a lot of the elements, but that's going to keep that electrical connection nice and safe over the life of the vehicle. So to get our tach signal on this vehicle, it's not equipped with an MSD box or anything. It's all in the distributor here. So there's a tach terminal, and that's going to be common on most HEI style distributors. So we plug a wire into that, fish that through the firewall, and it's that easy to hook up a tach on one of these Classics. So we've got a nice spot here on the firewall to push the wires through. Helpful to have a friend on the other side. Fish that through, and that's the connector for our water temp gauge. We're going to push the oil pressure sender wiring through. Now, the connector for that is just a touch bigger than that grommet is really going to be able to handle. So we were going to shorten the wiring a little bit anyways, so we're going to go ahead and clip that off. We put a little piece of tape or some adhesive material there, so that'll be easier to push through the hole. Clip this off, and we're going to feed that through. Moving on to the oil pressure sender, it's installed on the back of the block. Now, if you're familiar with a typical Chevy small block where the oil port is right next to the distributor, it's close on these big blocks, but it's actually a little farther back and slightly on the driver's side. It's kind of right where the block meets the transmission bell housing. So that's a 1/4 inch port right there. And again, because we're using our digital stepper motor sending units that are grounded through the harness, we're going to go ahead and apply a little bit of liquid teflon thread sealant. We've got the dash out of the vehicle, and we wanted to show you on the bench how this came out. I think it actually illustrates it a little bit better. So across the dash, you'll see we've got little screw holes throughout. Those are all going to be Phillips head. Now in the corner, you've got 2 large bolts that need to be undone, and you'll need to drop the column as well, and then this column bracket right here, so you can clear these studs. But that's really about the only thing securing that dash panel to the vehicle. So once you've got all that done, it can drop down a little bit, and you need to remove electrical connections. This particular vehicle had an aftermarket radio in the glove box, as well as an aftermarket EFI system. But otherwise, it's speedometer cable, some of the lights for the factory instrument cluster, and then the cables for the climate control system. But once all of those are disconnected, the dash slides easily out of the vehicle. So you can see here the way that the instrument cluster is attached. There is very, very good reason that we remove the entire dash to get this apart. Now, I guess in theory, you could get this cluster out without removing the dash, but it would be a monumental pain, and since the whole dash comes out so easily, it's definitely the recommended procedure. We're going to proceed with disassembly of the dashboard so we can install our classic dash gauge panel. These are really nice quality pieces. Classic Dash makes a huge assortment of drop-in gauge panels that allow you to easily install AutoMeter gauges without having to hack up your original dash. So we've got to take apart the existing knobs on here, and not surprisingly, they all come apart a little bit differently. So the light literally just pops right off. Then we've got these little bushings that we can use this tool to unscrew the bushing. So that's how the lights come off. We've got a small set screw on the wipers here that needs to be undone. And that'll remove that knob, and then the same style bushing underneath there is unscrewed. And then that'll come out. The cigarette lighter actually unscrews with this casing on the back, and then you kind of push those tabs in, and that comes out of the front. So to get the ignition switch out, you're going to turn the key to the accessory position. Now we've straightened out a cotter pin. You could use a paper clip or whatnot. You push down, you'll feel a little spring plunger, a little to the left, and the whole piece comes right out. Then we can go ahead and just unscrew the trim piece and remove that entire bit. Okay, with those pieces released, we've got some Phillips head screws on this trim piece right here that we'll need to remove. Here's our last one, and our whole original trim piece is free. Now we're taking the glove box lock off. Now this is all just kind of pressure. If you look in closely here, you can see there's kind of a nut-shaped thing going on here. This one's obviously been taken out a couple times over its life. In theory, you could probably use a wide flat head. We were able to get enough tension, literally just pushing a rag on it real hard. But those unscrew, and you can see there's 2 parts here. So this part doesn't unscrew, it's this that needs to unscrew to get that out, and then the whole tumbler comes out. From there, it's similar to the other trim piece. We've just got Phillips head screws right here that we'll need to take out. Alrighty, just pull that last Phillips head screw off, and our other trim pieces out. Now we're taking the radio out. You can see the knobs. Literally just pull on them, they come right out. I'm assuming this is a factory size, but a 5/8 nut right there. And I didn't even need to use a ratchet to unscrew it. All right, with that removed, it takes a bit of coercion. Radio trim piece will come out, and then we can slide the whole radio out. Now, Dave already has an aftermarket radio hidden away in here, and our classic dash piece has a really convenient radio delete panel, so that's how we're gonna install it on this vehicle. When installing the LEDs, we wanna make sure to measure twice, cut once. We hit it first with a center punch, then we drill a pilot hole, followed by the finishing hole, and then we thread the LEDs through. We want to make sure that we thread the resistor end in first, followed by the ground, and those will sink right into place. Now this certainly isn't required. A 1/4-inch spade terminal will do, but when wiring up the tach and speedo, we got these nice little connectors that are available through AutoMeter. So we're going to go ahead and crimp these little spade terminals onto here that'll drop into the connector. Now, very important to use a proper tool for your crimping. One of the things we get a lot of questions about is the terminal arrangements on the back of the gauges. And actually, if you see here closely, what the terminals are is engraved into the back of the case. So we just follow that. We've got our power, ground, our signal, and our light. And then we make our arrangement right here on the connector to match that. So we take our spade terminal, that's going to push in there, and then all of those will match up on the back of the unit. Here's all of our gauges and our indicator lights installed into the panels. We've got our connectors for our tach and speedo hooked up. Now, as the Chrono series gauges are digital stepper motor gauges, like all AutoMeter digital stepper motor gauges, they come already with a wiring harness and a quick connect. So that literally will just plug right into the back of the unit. We've slid our gauge panel into place here. You can see all of these holes actually line up really, really well. I mean, we're not exactly dealing with manufacturing from the CNC era here. So the fit is really nice. Really, the only thing we had to modify at all was this switch all the way over here, and just a tiny bit of work with a file. Everything went through. So reassembly is going to be exactly like disassembly was. So we can just tighten these down. Now these are keyed, so that stays in the right position there. And go ahead and get our switch here installed. Again, these are all keyed up, so pretty easy to get them in. And then just snug them up a little bit with these snap ring pliers. And we are good to go. Onto the cigarette lighter, same deal, push it in. The casing threads on right there. And then to put the key back in the tumbler, just get it right there, turn it, and we're all set. Moving on to installing this trim piece with our radio block-off plate, we first made sure that everything lined up and that our glove box release trim fits. Classic dash was nice enough to install the nice 3M dual-sided tape on the back of the unit. Obviously, anytime you're doing this sort of adhesive application, you want to make sure that you've cleaned the surface very thoroughly that it's going to be installed onto. We've gone ahead and used a little cleaner, sprayed onto a microfiber, and scoured that nicely. So can line everything up with Brandon's help here. Can push that into place and apply a good amount of pressure on the unit and wait for our adhesive to set. The trim panel piece is in place. Once you get that stuck on, you're going to reinstall the lock. This actually serves to anchor that down as well. You're going to wrestle with it just a little bit getting it on, but it does go on without too much trouble. With our gauges installed, we've moved on to the wiring, which you can see on the panel right here. We've got all of our connectors plugged in, got everything nicely wire tied together. Keep it still serviceable but nice and secure so we don't expect any issues down the road. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out here is this calibration button coming out of the back of the speedometer. Because the Chrono programmable speedometer uses the old style wheel odometer despite being an electronic gauge, it's good for the look, but we didn't want to clutter up the face with a button on there. Since most people are only ever going to calibrate the speedometer once that comes out of the back of the unit, that is included with it, and you use that for calibration. One other thing of note is we have a flying lead off of our fuel level gauge right here. We have a brown and a black wire. Now these are used for fuel level calibration. Digital stepper motor fuel level gauges, like the one in our Chrono series, can be calibrated to work with just about every sending unit in the world. There are a number of pre-configured sending unit calibrations that come in the gauge. This one is set at the factory for 0 to 90 ohms, which conveniently enough matches up perfectly with the 0 to 90 ohm sender found in our 67 Chevelle here. But if it didn't match up, we could easily switch to another calibration, or if we had a really peculiar fuel level sender, there's also a custom calibration mode where we can configure it to work with literally just about every fuel level sender on the planet. To figure out the wiring for our indicator lights, turn signals, and high beam, we actually looked at the factory instrument cluster here, in which everything was labeled. Now, we hooked the headlight switch up and tested with a multimeter just to be certain, but it turns out that the painless wiring kit in this vehicle totally followed exactly what the original wiring was. So those lights are single wire lights, and they would ground through the actual dash housing itself. So we're going to run our own grounds for those and then use those power wires to trigger them. Moving on to the wiring inside of the vehicle, we have a couple of things we need to attend to before we reinstall the dash panel. As I mentioned before, there are one-wire light sockets throughout the dash that are powered all the time and get their ground through the dash panel itself. Obviously, we're not going to use those with our new setup, but rather than cut up the existing wiring in the vehicle, we've got some really large heat shrink, and we heat shrunk those over the edges of those sockets, insulating them, thereby keeping us from having any sort of electrical issues or any sort of fire hazards in the vehicle. Additionally, we added some male spade terminals to both the directionals and the high beam indicator that'll plug right into the female spade terminals we added to the dash panel. Something of very, very important note. On vehicles like this, the original factory charge light can be very, very important. This vehicle, it doesn't matter because it's already been converted to a one-wire PowerMaster alternator. But on these original charging systems, the charge light in the dash is critical for the vehicle charging. It uses the load of that incandescent light bulb to excite the alternator and to tell the vehicle to charge. If you remove that, the vehicle will no longer charge. So if the alternator has not been updated and you're swapping the dash out on one of these classic GM vehicles, make sure you leave the incandescent bulb for the charging light behind the dash, plugged in and functioning. And we'll slide the dash panel back in. Definitely going to want a friend to help you with this job. So with the gauges installed, we wanted to tackle the lighting on the gauges. Now, it's a personal choice, but we love the look of these Chrono series gauges always on. So anytime the vehicle is started, the gauges are going to be on, independent of the headlight switch. Now, with that said, we want to make sure that the gauges are still able to be dimmed, so we used an AutoMeter 9114 LED dimmer module. It's a tiny little device with a knob on it, and thankfully we were able to hide this guy right under the dash here for easy dimming for nighttime driving. This car sees a lot of street miles, so we wanted to make sure that we retain all of the daily usability that's expected of this beast. Moving forward, we're tidying up the wiring here on the vehicle. So Where we've installed the oil pressure senders conveniently almost right next to our pass-through in the firewall. So just a small length of wiring right there. Our temperature sensor runs along this conduit path and plugs in into the water neck here. We've got some nice shrink tubing around all the wiring for the senders. That's going to increase durability and just make sure that that's something that never needs to be serviced on this vehicle. The tach signal we've pulled directly off of the tach output on the distributor. Now you can see that we've split that signal, as the fast EFI system on this vehicle requires a tach signal to operate. We're sharing that tach output with the EFI and the tach in the dash. Now, no worries about doing that. The tach signal is what's called a square wave pattern, and there will be no signal degradation. Both the tach and the EFI system will get exactly what they need to function properly. Moving on to hooking up our speedometer, this vehicle is equipped with an American Powertrain TKO 600 5-speed transmission. Super easy to hook up a conventional speed sensor to it, 7/8 18 threaded output on the tail shaft of the transmission. But we're going a little more high-tech with this AutoMeter GPS speed sensor right here. This little bad boy we're going to hide underneath the dash, and if you look in the corner, we have this magnetic micro antenna that we've installed on the vehicle. Now, the great thing about this, because it's magnetic, when Dave goes to a car show or whatnot, he can pull this off, tuck it back underneath the dash, and it's out of the way. No one's any wiser. Now, because we're using a new AutoMeter speedometer with a new AutoMeter GPS unit, there's absolutely no calibration necessary. You literally plug the thing in, no matter what your gears are, tire size, rear end, none of that matters. It plugs in, it works right out of the box. So that's a wrap on the ARS TV 1967 Chevelle. Got the new Chrono gauges installed. Man, they look absolutely terrific in there. No need for any calibration. Once it warms up a little bit, I think we'll probably have a video of this bad boy out on the road. But until next time, guys, thanks so much for watching. Joseph Mills from AutoMeter Garage. We'll see you next time.